Let's further discuss this with Rich Outzen. He is a geopolitical consultant and a retired U.S. diplomat, and he joins us live now from Washington, D.C. It's a pleasure speaking to you, sir, today. Now, the U.S. has pledged $2.2 billion, a new package of aid to Ukraine, a lot of money, and Americans are worried both about the money reaching the right people for the right cause and, of course, ultimately worried about their own domestic issues here. Do you think that this is helping or hurting Biden?
Well, I think at this stage there's broad bipartisan support, so both in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party for supporting Ukrainian sovereignty and continuing large-scale military assistance. I think you've got a combination of factors where, sort of on the Democrat side, they see this as a moment for President Biden to lead. There's a strong Atlanticist and internationalist impulse there, and Putin is seen as being, of course, an autocrat and an aggressive sort of warmonger, if you will, if you look at all the Russian sort of interventions in the Caucasus and Syria, Libya, other places, Wagner Group. So with the Democrats, it's very popular for those reasons. And on the Republican side, it's very popular because of standard geopolitics. Russia's seen as a great power competitor, and it's understood that if they're successful in dismantling a European state, that they may have an appetite for more later. So as of right now, that's still holding. If you look at the scale of aid, $2.2 billion in this package, and even as the packages add up, it's still not clouding out or crowding out other types of spending. Our spending problems in the balance of payments issues that we have between our tax receipts and the expenditures are not driven by foreign aid, nor really by defense. The economic problems have to do with Congress rolling back and reining in spending on a lot of domestic priorities. So I think if you look at the numbers involved here, it's not hard to sustain. And currently, President Biden enjoys support from both sides of the aisle to continue supporting Ukraine's defense.
Right, and looking at the battlefield, the U.S. has ruled out sending fighter jets to Ukraine. Do you think that their reluctance is eventually going to turn into regret, seeing how the war has already unfolded on the ground?
Well, I think this is following a similar pattern that we've seen since, frankly, February 24th last year and even before, where there's concern in the U.S. that providing too much equipment or too high quality equipment might actually lead to further escalations of the conflict. And so you saw a reticence to provide certain types of artillery, so rocket artillery and so forth early on. That changed, and we ended up providing the MLRS systems and the rockets that go with them, the HIMARS, and their associated equipment. And then you saw a reticence to provide tanks, and now we've decided to give tanks. I think it's the appropriate thing to go slowly and to make sure that this is measured. We're signaling to the Russians that we'll give defensive capabilities to Ukraine if you continue to insist on this offensive. So we don't want to rush to giving everything. And there is a question in the U.S., frankly, in Washington, about giving too many capabilities like the F-16s that have been requested that have an offensive potential. Keeping Russia from making any further gains has broad support, as I said. But the idea of a large Ukrainian counteroffensive, say, into Donbass or into Crimea, I think is something that people have not quite digested yet. So I think we'll go slow on F-16s. It's not impossible that it could be like with the tanks and the long-range rockets that were ultimately provided, but we're not there yet.
Right, and speaking of an offensive, there are warnings coming out of Ukraine saying that Russia is going to launch a major offensive 1 year on the anniversary of the war, February 24th to be exact. How much worse do you think the situation is going to get before it gets any better, meaning the two sides meet at the negotiating table?
Right. Well, I guess sometimes people refer to this as a mutually hurting stalemate, right? Both sides need to reach a level of pain where they understand that it's not going to get better and the costs do not justify the rewards. Russia's not there yet because Russia still thinks it hasn't marshaled enough of its superior manpower. It's got roughly a 3-to-1 advantage in overall military strength and manpower. So they think they can sustain this and overcome the Western support. They think the West will get tired of the support and that the Ukrainians will not be able to resist. So as long as they believe that, they're going to continue to launch large offensives. I've heard that they think they can get as many as 500,000 people mobilized for upcoming offensives in the spring and summer. But they've underestimated the Ukrainians before, and
Hmm.
frankly, I think it will get worse. I think the Russians will cause a lot of destruction. But let's look at this. Every single day, the Russians are bombing civilian neighborhoods and apartment buildings.
Right.
They're pressing the offensive in Bakhmut. Will they feed more people in, and will it lead to increased deaths on both sides? Absolutely. Do I think they'll actually be able to take Kyiv? Or somehow take some portion or inflict some amount of casualties that will make Ukraine say, okay, that's fine, you're right, we don't exist as
Hmm.
a country. No, there's an asymmetry of interest there. And that's why ultimately the Ukrainians will prevail, because Russia will reach a point where it realizes it's exhausted its offensive resources and the Ukrainians
Right.
simply won't quit.
All right, Rich Outzen, thank you so much for joining us here on the NewsHour and sharing that analysis with us.
Thanks. Good to be with you.